Gathering and sending doesn't sound all that spiritual, but it actually is. Let me tell you about it. Well, I learned about gathering and sending in kind of a weird sort of way. It happened through my marriage. So around year 10, I was like most marriages, we weren't going to divorce or anything, but it was pretty rough. And finally, the Lord said to me, Trevor, you've read Ephesians 5 like forever. Just do for Amy what I've done for you. And I began reading, and essentially what I've rediscovered about Ephesians 5 is that here's what Yahweh does. He invites me into a safe space. He compensates for all my weaknesses. He doesn't make me feel bad about it. And then he instructs me gently from there. So washing Amy in the Word, that doesn't mean reading the Bible to her. It means dying for her. It means embodying Yeshua for her. It's a whole world of difference. And once I changed my mindset on that, everything else fell into place. It doesn't mean it didn't require a ton of work. It did. But it was about gathering Amy in. Now, there are going to be some theologians that say that gathering and sending are equal, and I'm going to say, yeah, probably. But I'm going to say if there's an emphasis, the emphasis would definitely be on gathering. Gathering first, sending second, or worship first, time with the Lord first. And out of that relationship, then we move into a world, then we are witnesses. Now, to get the idea here, I want to introduce you to a few important Hebrew terms. So the first one is Mishkan, or tabernacle. The next is Moed, or appointed time. If you hear Moedim, that's just Hebrew and plural, the im part. And so then you've got appointed times. So when I refer to the appointed times, that's the word that's used in Leviticus 23. Then there's the Ohel Moed, or the tent of meeting. So the emphasis is on the meeting here. And then we've talked about the Sabbath. That is our day of rest. So it's where we reorient to the Lord. But there's also a holy convocation, a Mikra Kodesh. And that's important, is that the reason that Yahweh is gathering his little chicks, gathering us together, is to put us into a safe spot and then mold us and shape us through our worship. So that's important. And then finally, I want to introduce you to Vayikra El Moshe. So that's then the Lord called to Moses. So Vayikra is the actual Hebrew word for Leviticus. And so Leviticus isn't so much tied to the Levites as much as it is that God is calling people into relationship with him. And so in the Hebrew world, they don't have chapter and verse so much. They have what's called portions or Torah portions. And you look at the first few words of the portion, and that's what you call it, Vayikra. God called. So in Leviticus, God did indeed call Moses, but he's calling Moses to the tent of meeting, calling Moses to him for a purpose. First, to make him feel safe. Yahweh always calls us gently. And then second, to compensate for his weaknesses. I've told you about these 5 sacrifices. If you look in Leviticus 1 through 7, that's exactly what happens. It explains the multifaceted ways in which Jesus was our sacrifice. And then he doesn't make us feel bad about it. He wants us to feel forgiven and loved. And then he instructs us. And that's pretty easy. So that's kind of a big deal. When I hear people talk about they might say social justice, but it's a lot bigger than that. True religion cares for orphans and widows, binds up people's wounds. We're good Samaritans. We are a kind of people that we open up our houses, our nations, or whatever. I'm not even making a political statement here, but the sojourner is welcome. You may come in that you might be cared for and loved, and we'll do things to care for and love you. But see, all that stuff first comes out of the convocation, the time that we're in that tent of meeting being transformed by our Messiah. A person that has been transformed, so to speak, would be the Proverbs 31 lady. And ultimately, we're going to get to it, that I'm going to contend that Yahweh is like a husband and the bride of Christ is like a bride of Christ. And she comes in to convocation, she feels safe, he compensates for weakness, and then instructs her gently. Now, one of the proof texts that we like to use for going out into our world or just being obedient to God. And I think it's important. Micah 6:8. He has told you, O man, what is good, or O people. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Now, this is a qualitative take from the prophet Micah on something that actually was said much earlier. In fact, you're going to hear the duplicate phrasing. So this is a qualitative take. And I think Micah phrases it this way because even though Yahweh has given them instruction, they have not done it with any kind of warm-heartedness. Their hearts are hard, and Yahweh sometimes just doesn't even like their appointed times. He doesn't like their holy convocations. He kind of just says, don't even date me. Don't even come. Don't. I wanted to do all this for you. I wanted you to feel safe, but the thing is, you keep fornicating with other gods, and I just had enough. And so the prophets address this sort of issue. Well, anyway, you're going to hear a similar phrasing in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 12 and 13. Here's what it says. Now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? Sound familiar? It's not Micah 6:8, Deuteronomy 10. But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways and love him, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the Lord's commandments and his statutes, which I am commanding you today, and they're all for your good. I want people to know that worship is about coming into that safe spot. So if you've taken a class in the Psalms, salvation is about rightly orienting ourselves to God. And many of the Psalms are for those who have already oriented, but they've gone out into the world and they've become disoriented for whatever reason. The world's jaded them, or they've just, people are human. We need encouragement. We need help. We need to be reminded that God is King. And so we come into that worship place in the Psalms. So it goes orientation, disorientation in the world, and then reorientation. And that's part of the reason we read the Psalms, is because we want to be reoriented toward our God. Mikra Kodesh is like that. God calls us in lovingly. And I'm not going to go over it now, but there is something called the Yadid Nefesh. It's a little song, and it just means beloved of the Lord. I won't read it to you, but it's like some of the old rabbis, they actually got it. And they saw the Holy Convocation as like God saying, this is date time. Come in, be with me. I really want to make you safe. I really want to transform you. I really want to instruct you. I just want to be with you. And I'll put the link below. It's just really good. So, anyway, if we are going to be effective witnesses, it starts first in worship, where the transformation happens. Amy, my wife, after I did all that stuff and made her feel safe, confidence goes up, love goes up, joy goes up, her ability to talk goes up. The same happens with us when we're with our Savior. All these things become transformational, and then we go out into our world. Last thing, I used to have people read Mark Laberton, and it's a good book. One of the two things that Mark does great is he covers Sabbath real well and its importance and how that bleeds out if we're really going to do the dangerous act of worship of being little embassies, of going into Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. And we're going to do that as whole people, having been transformed by our Sabbath time. That's a good book. But I've included other books because I recognize that in your differing backgrounds, that the Holy Convocation or the church has not always been a safe space. And that is not an accurate or good reflection of God. And so when you read those things, in part is now, what do we do? Now that we know the narrative, now that we press into Holy Convocation, how do we make safe spaces? How do we be safe so that we as a community of people might feel safe, be transformed, and it reflects that in the community. And so that way we can be whole people. And when we go out to the world, they might look at us and say, oh, look how they love each other. And look how they care for us. These must be disciples of Jesus. I'll see you next week.